critical moments in KISStory.
I think this album, as far as a critical moment, this album itself was critical in the fact that we might not have had Kiss as we knew it without this album. If they would have not done this album, if they would have chose to maybe do another live album or another studio album, even if they would have brought Eddie Kramer in to do another studio album, I don't think it would have had the effect. They knew that they were not getting any album sales and they weren't getting any songs on the radio, but they were starting to get bigger and bigger audiences. So it made sense for them to try to capture the live experience. And I feel like they did. To a lot of people, this is the quintessential Kiss album. To a lot of people, this is the best Kiss album of all time. And to a lot of people, another critical point about this album, it's critical this album was an end of an era for the first 70s era band of the band, the era from 73 to 75, that had 3 studio albums and then a live, because for many hardcore and early Kiss fans, the band was never the same after a live. They took Destroyer marked a change in direction of the band and the sound of the band. So the Kiss was never the same after this album. They started becoming stinky rich, stinking rich, stinky rich, and stinking rich. And
sorry about that.
And the egos started growing. You know, they already had egos to begin with, and the egos started growing. And then come the abuse of substances, and Bob Ezrin literally having cocaine in the control booth during the making of Destroyer didn't help matters any. So the band was not the same after this. Plus, I think after this was really when they started quit being hungry, because they had everything that they wanted. And then they started chasing fame and started building the brand after this. I've even heard Gene say that in a recent interview, that as far as he was concerned in Kiss, there's a couple really good interviews out, by the way. There's one of Gene with Billy Corgan, and there's one with Paul with Richard Marx. 2 really good interviews out. But Gene basically told Billy Corgan that to him it was never about being a band. It was establishing a brand. And I think Paul was the person that was more concerned about the music, and Gene was always more concerned about the image and the branding of the band. Which I'm glad they had both, because they did have both. That's what makes Kiss Kiss, is the imagery and everything that goes around the band as a brand, and then the music is good too. So it was good to have both. But I think that after Destroyer, they weren't the same. And I think that was kind of critical too, because after this album, they they gained a larger fan base, but they began to lose some of their original fan base. Mm-hmm. So that's what I've got so far for critical about this time in this album. What about you, AJ?
Oh yeah, I mean it was a Hail Mary pass, you know. The 3 albums before were just kind of like, I guess, a commercial failure, supposedly. Not to us, but yeah, there's like one last chance. Let's just do this, because the studio albums aren't doing it, and people need to see or hear what what it's like to see or hear us live. So
right.
Definitely. I mean, shit. I mean, if it wasn't for that, I don't know. I don't know if it would have what would have happened after that, because Casablanca was on the ropes, and a coin put his money in to fund, what was it, the tour or whatever it was for this. So put his own money in. So yeah, it was definitely they were teetering, man. And I think if they never did this album, it probably they would have crashed, I think, you know.
I think if they not had Alive, if they would have tried to do another studio album, that might have been the last one.
Yeah. Yeah. And then they would have just fizzled out into space somewhere.
We'd be having a conversation going, man, you remember that band from the early 70s, Kiss, man? They, they could have really been something. I wonder why they never put a live album out,
Right. Yeah. Released, what was it, 9 days before I was released. So that's something special with me and this album.
Yeah. Had a coin, not put his American Express up and funded everything. And, if Casablanca didn't have a hit, like you said, they were done because the albums just weren't selling. And they were doing everything based on their live show anyways. That's kind of the difference between music back then and now. Now it's all about, okay, well, let's see if you can trend on TikTok or Instagram Reels or Facebook Reels. Back then it was selling albums. And if your albums didn't sell, your label was going to drop you. And that's how it was up until, this whole social media boom. But this album, live or not, which it's not, we all agree that the only thing really live is Peter's drum tracks. It feels live. Like I listened to the vinyl right before we started. It feels live. The crowd isn't overpowering. They've got it balanced just right. Eddie Kramer did a phenomenal job, obviously. And you can tell that they've obviously done this to a point where they're in the room all together playing like they're playing a show. It had to have been done that way. There's no other way they could have done it, individually. It's not possible. And if they did, kudos to them for doing it that way, because I couldn't see it happening.
I've always wondered what was Peter doing during the time that they were recording, because he may have re-recorded some of his vocals. But I don't know, man. You listen to some of these live recordings that was done around this time, and Peter's vocals, his drums, you can just tell if you've got a musical ear. You can tell if you see some of these recordings from Cobo Hall and the different places that they recorded at. You can tell that those are you could probably line them up sonically with each other, and their sine wave would match because it is those drums. Even Peter's vocals sounds a lot like that. Like he may have not have re-recorded his vocals very much, but I just kind of wonder what was Peter doing and how difficult it might have been you're playing along with a drum track. You're playing along with something that is set in time. You can't change it. You can't alter it because it's recorded, pre-recorded, and you have to play to it. And that takes a special level of skill, and then to pull it off and sound like it's not rehearsed, not pre-record, not recorded, not, like
make it sound raw.
Make it sound raw like it does. And even layered, because if you go back and listen, I swear sometimes there's more than two guitars playing. Because you can just listen, you can hear, you're like, no, wait a minute, I hear Paul doing this, and I know the tone of Paul's guitar, it's kind of thinner, and then Ace's guitar is more of that tone to it. And then you're listening, you're like, well, now wait a minute, who is playing that I hear? Because that's a third person. So yeah, it's very well done, masterfully done. And I agree with what Jay Layton said. That comment, they went from being a dark rock, hard rock band from the streets to being a brand comic book heroes after Alive. And that's true. That's true. Because what was the first album after Alive? It was the Ken Kelly painting. They were superheroes. And then that's when the
this is like the prequel.
Yeah, because look at their first album cover. Look at their first album covers. It was the photo of them imitating "This Is the Beatles," and then the kabuto like Japanese black and white of the Hotter Than Hell album, and then the black and white of the Dress to Kill album, and then you have this picture, which is a classic photo burned in a lot of people's minds of that photo. And then after that, what do you have? A painting, a drawing, a painting. You have a drawing on painting on Destroyer, a drawing on Rock and Roll Over, and a painting on Love Gun, and they're all superhero comic type. So yeah, it's the definitive cut line in between. This was Kiss before, and this was Kiss after.